So tonight's class on the tributaries of Eden for Parshas Vayishlach. Parshas Vayishlach has a lot of different parts, a lot of interesting parts in the Parsha. And we're going to focus on one that many people don't necessarily focus on. And we begin with, before we get into the text itself, but we begin with a Rashi towards the beginning of the Parsha. Actually on page 172 if you want to take a look at it. Rashi says, V'haya ha-machneh ha-nish'ar lifleta. Rashi commenting on Yaakov dividing his camp into two, and it would be in order to, as the verse tells us, that there should be a remnant, there should be survivors if the other one is captured and killed. The other group will survive. So the question is, how does that fit with all these other things he's doing? How does that fit with trying to make peace with Esav, and yet he's splitting up the two camps? How does that work? So Rashi tells us, Hiskin atzmo lishlosha devarim, that Yaakov is actually putting into play three different steps, three different things. Ledoron, the gift to Esav. Letefillah, the prayer to Hashem. U'lemilchama, and there's going to be a war. And Yaakov is setting himself up for all three. He's taking all three possibilities into account. He's going to send the gift to Esav. He's going to come up to meet Esav, ready to fight with him, in which case he would come in two separate groups. And he also prayed to Hashem, and hopes that will save him from needing to do anything that involves anyone getting hurt. That's Rashi telling us that Yaakov's sending of the gifts was part of his plan and trying to resolve the issue. And what we'd like to figure out tonight is, what is the purpose of the gift? What is Rashi here uses the word doron, which is not a word that the Torah uses. We'll look at soon and see what word the Torah uses. But what is the purpose of sending Esav this gift? So, the answer to this, before we try to guess and say, well, if I was Yaakov, this is why I would send it, let's see if we can find clues in the pasuk as to why Yaakov sends the gifts. So if you look at page 173, he says he put his men in charge of the animals, and he instructed them, he gave them specific instructions, towards the bottom, verse 18, when you meet Esav, and he will ask you, who do you belong to? Where are you going? Who are these animals for? You shall say to him, we belong to your servant Yaakov. And this is, what's the term the Torah uses? Mincha hi shelucha. It is a mincha. How would we translate the word mincha?
Offering?
Well, mincha corresponds with the offering. So we'll see. You look in the English, they translate it as tribute, but we'll get back to whether that's the right translation. It is a mincha. Let's hold on to that. To my master, to Esav, and actually Yaakov's right behind us. And he commanded so for the second one, and he commanded so for the third one. And all the other people, he instructed them to give those same words. Now, verse 21 is the difficult verse to read. Va'amartem, and you shall say, Gam hinei avdecha Yaakov acharenu. Also, Yaakov is behind us, the literal translation. Ki amar, for he has said, Achapra fanav ba'mincha. I will appease his face with the mincha which goes before me. How do you understand that?
It's an appeasement. The gift is an appeasement.
Peace offering.
Well, what's the translation of achapra panav? Kapara?
Atonement.
Atone panav b'mincha. What?
Save face.
What do you mean by save face? Okay, we want to know the exact the exact purpose of Yaakov's sending of this offering. Using the term atonement, how is this atone for him? How does this atone for all the hurt that he has caused Esav? Again, in Esav's mind, he robbed him of his firstborn right, and then of his father's blessings. So what is this?
These are material things which he felt he should have gotten. Esav should have gotten.
So what's he doing? Restitution?
Kind of a restitution, appeasement, some kind of thing like that.
Well, there's some kind of thing like that is what we want to put our finger on. What exactly is he doing? Is he making up? Is this actually repayment of damages? It doesn't seem like 500 plus animals should cover all the damages that he caused.
Well, Esav voluntarily sold.
We're not talking about the truth. We're talking about what's going on in Esav's head.
I think you mean in Yaakov.
No, in Esav's head. Yaakov has to respond to the way Esav feels. Now, even though Esav is wrong for feeling that Yaakov cheated him, it was a very clear deal. You've been lying to Yitzchak the whole time. But in Esav's mind, he feels robbed and cheated.
Right.
But
So
Esav is materialistic.
Right?
And these are material goods.
No, I get that. I think that's what you were saying. But he's sending him material goods for what purpose? In order to, it can't be to repay him for his loss.
No. It's like a peace offering. It's like saying, I'm not I know that I am the owner of the birthright, but I am going to, in a sense, bow down to you and offer you my best things out of
500 animals?
well, whatever.
Exactly.
That's a lot. He spread them out so they looked like more.
No, he did. He did do that.
Yes, he did.
He did do that, but still, I mean, we'll see. This is one of the explanations. So what's he really then doing to Esav?
Apologizing.
You're showing him honor.
Well, honor is a different explanation. And I know you were saying the bowing down, but we're saying just with the gift. Why is that part of an apology?
Because it's like saying, maybe I wasn't due all of these things, and I can at least part with these, at least as a symbolic gesture.
Again, you're still sticking with restitution.
Well, a sort of symbolic kind of thing. I agree with you that it might not be the entire thing, but at least it's a gesture.
I think maybe he's saying,
Okay.
I didn't want, what happened wasn't because I wanted to hurt you. And I didn't want to hurt you.
So that's an interesting way of doing it. So let's think about this. I mean, let's say accidentally you would do something to a family member and you feel like maybe you overreacted, and so now and next time you're about to see them, you go to their favorite restaurant and you order their favorite dish and you show up with that. It actually it works. Mm-hmm. It works. Why?
Because a person feels that you are actually being thoughtful of them. You're recognizing their
even though
feelings.
What I did to them was I called them some name.
Well, you're saying I'm sorry.
Right, but you're saying sorry, but you're also adding to it the gift. And I'm asking, what does that gift do to the I'm sorry? Because your apology can be sincere, and you can show that you're sincere. This is something a little more. And I would try to
It's
put...
honor to the person. In
Well-
some way, you're honoring them.
It seems
Well,
like,
you're going back to the tribute concept,
it
which we'll
seems
see.
like we are all
Wait
in
a
some
minute.
way very bribable, right?
You had 6
You see, there's the word bribe.
It's
Not a
nothing.
big deal.
Buttering up is the term you
We're
use.
really so vulnerable to getting
The
that.
edge of the anger.
Right.
Cutting the edge of the anger, just so that he's not quite as
It's-
intense.
You're all right. And that's what's happening is that it becomes part of the apology, but the reason why it's part of the apology is because I am doing something to you that makes you feel good, And I want that good feeling that you experience should be associated with me in order to make the apology better able to reach you. That's significant. I mean, if we think about it from that point, we should, it'll be hard the next time that you receive such a gift. You'll be a little more aware of what that person is trying to do, and actually not as likely to receive it so well. So because you'll receive it better, and this is a key point, anything that you'll receive better by not realizing what that person is actually trying to do it shows that really what it comes down to is a bribe. Let me say this to you. What would happen if the person would show up with your favorite brownie from your favorite bakery? The person shows up with a box of them and said, I was driving by and I was thinking about, I'm coming to see you anyway. I was driving by and I know that you really like these, and so I wanted to give these to you. And I was hoping that when I give them to you, it'll make you feel a little bit less angry because you'll feel good about me making you feel good. And then when I apologize next, I'm hoping that you'll be more susceptible to my apology. Would that work?
No, but that's not really, but you're I don't think that that's the entire story. A person's not going to go to that trouble to try to make sure that the fences can be mended, unless one of two things. They really, really care about the person, and they care about that relationship, or all the way on the other side of things, they're really trying to manipulate you for some sort of other purpose.
Absolutely. I think you're right in that clearly the fact that the person is doing a little more than an apology.
Getting exactly what you like.
Right. That it should, but you should never say to the person that that's what you're doing. Right.
Because that sounds
Because then it sounds like I would like to manipulate you right now, and so I'm doing the following. By saying that, it makes it feel like you know that the goal of this action is to affect the other person's feeling towards you.
It's funny, I'm surprised that people aren't taken in by it. Sometimes clients will start with me, they'll bring presents, and I'll say to them, you actually don't need to bring me a present. If you do the work in here and show up on time and pay your bill, I will like you. You don't need to. I'm very suspicious of people.
Well, I guess so. I mean, the thing is, when you're talking to people...
I'm not talking about it's my birthday. I'm talking about just a present to make me like them.
But a person who isn't from now on going to judge themselves, not just based on their own opinion, but with someone's help, they want to influence that person to have right? Because then you'll like them like they like themselves, and you'll make them feel better. Yeah.
So
it's like bribing yourself.
Presents are basically
that's a different. It's a different situation though, because it's a therapeutic. I mean,
but still,
you want to get the therapist on your side if you're.
But even if there is no other person, even if you're just working with yourself, you think that because now my opinions are of myself, by myself, are going to be formulated through my work with someone else, the better I get that person to think of me, the better that person will help me think of me.
But then you're only fooling yourself.
I think that's the point.
I'm very suspicious of presents, and Esau should have been suspicious too.
Right. So certainly for Yaakov to say, and here's the problem, the literal reading of verse 21 is, you shall say to him, Yaakov is behind us, ki amar, because Yaakov said, achapra fanav bamincha. I want to, Rashi's literal translation is, I want to soothe his anger by giving him a gift. And that's just bad move.
In the English, they have it in parentheses. I don't know if there's any indication of that in the Hebrew. And it seems to me, the way they have it in the English, that this is basically saying, he's telling them to say what he told them to say, and you shall say, moreover, because he said to himself.
Okay, very good. So you are nuanced enough to pick up on what the translator was trying to do. Because in the Hebrew doesn't read that way. But, and let me tell you where they got that from. The Ibn Ezra says that verse 21 is not the words of Yaakov, but the words of Moshe. The Ibn Ezra says that line, for he said, I'd better appease him and calm his anger before I meet him, is Moshe's filling in, based on God's instruction, but meaning that's a parenthetical comment on the story, and because of that, the translators, they went along with the Ibn Ezra's take, because that seems to be the most comfortable one. The problem with this is, as the Ramban raises this issue, the Ramban says, why did Moshe or Hashem instruct Moshe to add this line? Wouldn't it already be known to us that that's the purpose? Would anyone have missed this point, that Yaakov is sending him gifts in order to make Esav feel a little better so that he can butter him up before the meeting? So if it's the words of Yaakov, so the Torah is telling you the words of Yaakov. But if it's not, and Moshe is just saying, by the way, in case you haven't caught on, this is in order to make Esav feel better before the meeting, says the Ramban, I think that's superfluous.
Maybe Yaakov is saying this to the people who are going with the animals, not so that they should say it to Esau, but so that they should have a clear idea of what their mission really is.
Right, except he's already given them the instructions.
Right,
So,
but the reasons behind the instructions. Make sure that you speak only nicely to him because I'm trying to appease him here. Make sure that nothing goes wrong because I'm trying to appease him here. That maybe he's giving them these instructions.
Right.
This is really
I think it's a fair explanation. You're just going to have a difficulty with the words ki amar. Ki amar, if these are in fact the words of Yaakov then it would be, and you shall say that these are to Yaakov, and he is behind us, for he said. So, for he said, that for is going to be difficult in that take. Because if they're not meant to repeat it, and it's just his words to them, the for, or because he said, you could work it out, because ki can have other meanings, but the simple reading is a little difficult. Because of this, the Ramban reads the purpose of these gifts, as someone else said, that they were pure tribute. And he reads the words achapra panav, not like Rashi, I will wipe away his anger, but from the word kofer, which is a pidyon nefesh, a redemption of soul. It is a tribute when you come before the king. And the Ramban says they were meant to say, for Yaakov said, how could I come before my brother Esav without tribute? So they were meant to repeat this to Esav, saying that Yaakov feels that you, as the older brother, we need to give you a tribute when we come to your presence after 22 years, or in this case 20 years of being gone.
Isn't that a problem?
Says the Ramban.
It's like Abraham saying about Yishmael, what about my son?
Right. Says the Ramban, because the Ramban, as we mentioned a few weeks ago, learns that most of Sefer Bereshis are little clues for how we are supposed to handle ourselves in the future. So says the Ramban that the Torah is setting it up here, Yaakov is setting this up to teach us that while we are in exile and pursued by our enemies, we need to take the approach of tribute and be of those who follow this custom of giving to the kings and of doing whatever it is that nations do whenever they are under the power of a large kingdom.
But was he really under Esau's power?
Well, it's not about Esav, according to this. That's what the Ramban is saying. It isn't about Esav. Yaakov is just using this to establish for the future, when we will be in exile, Yaakov is establishing for the Jewish people that tribute is, in fact, a Jewish approach towards peace with the nations.
case, wouldn't Jacob be coming into Esav's land? I mean, he's kind of saying, this is your land and we're going to be here under you.
Well, there isn't so much emphasis on land, because Esav never claimed Eretz Yisrael. Right? It's interesting, because it wouldn't be for another couple of thousand years before they would even claim some right to the Holy Land. So at this point, it's just who's in charge. And so Yaakov is approaching Esav with the you can be in charge, and I'm going to give you tribute, but not so much because he feels that Esav himself needs the tribute, but because of future generations.
I'm wondering whether this still is not it still has some connection to the bracha, like saying, we've talked about this before, but we haven't actually found the source. It's just something that we've seen, that when Yaakov looks at Lavan and he says, this isn't the same face that I was seeing before, that's actually a comment. He's worried about himself, that he's now become materialistic like Lavan.
Okay.
So if Yaakov is really someone who is focused on the spiritual as opposed to the material, then this gesture of tribute or honor to Esav is also perhaps also a sign to Esav that he, although he acquired all of this stuff, that he's really going to be more focused on the spiritual, and he's not well, maybe he got that bracha, but he realizes for himself he's not going to compete with Esav, and so therefore he's
Right, no,
giving him.
I think that the Mefarshim do take that approach. The problem is, as I said, 500 plus animals really isn't that much. We'll talk about why he came up with that number soon. But it really isn't that much in terms of a demonstration, because Yaakov does have more than 1,000 times that much. More than 1,000 times that
But
much.
if you're trying to show somebody by a gesture that
Right.
you're, that you start somewhere and you show that I'm, he's going to be focused on the spiritual, and he's not going to go as heavily after.
You could work with that explanation. I'm not taking away from it. There are Mefarshim who say that. In fact, Rashi says, "Vayihi li shor v'chamor." All I've got is an ox and a donkey. Like this is not the fulfillment of the blessings. And a little commentary say what he talking about. He's got way more than an ox and a donkey. He's got 600,000 sheep. So, however they read it, then that's certainly going to fit into that explanation. But the Ramban is not reading that way. And Rashi is certainly reading it as a bribe. And a bribe is never a reflection of how much I have. A bribe is always a reflection of how much money do I need in order to get away with what, I'm speeding. So when the officer asks me for license and registration, I hand him a $100 bill. So I wouldn't do it. I'm just saying, if I do that,
I know
It
the
doesn't-
defense attorney view.
yeah, first of all, today it wouldn't work because they'd always be suspicious that someone is. Well, I'm just saying, if someone does that, I'm not going to do it. Yes,
It's a bad idea.
When someone does that, they're not saying I want to share my money with you. They're just saying, let's just save ourselves both the trouble, and you'll have a free dinner on me tonight. So it's never a reflection of the overall. So Rashi's not reading it that way. But there are those who read that this was him saying, you want? Take. You can have it. This isn't what I'm about. Okay, so...
Before you go, I thought that every animal that he had, especially the sheep, was a Jewish soul. Why he would want to
That's
give
what I
it?
was going to
we're going to, hopefully, I'll get to that in a little bit. I hope to get to that.
If we just stop talking.
No, it's all good. Okay, so the language of the Ramban is, And I'm just loosely translating. And there's also here an allusion for all generations, for all that happened with our forefather and with his brother Esav will always happen to us. So we should also take the approach of this righteous man and use prayer, gifts, and war in order to save ourselves. Then he says, let me get all right, next page. This process alludes to us that we will never be in one place taken by the people of Esav, for then they will erase our names. Yimcho Eshemenu, they will erase our name, blot out our names. But rather, while some of us will be trying to destroy us in their lands, there will always be some other king who will decree upon our money, and there will yet be another king or kingdom that will provide us shelter. The words of the Ramban. That when the Germans are trying to wipe us out, the Americans will open their doors and declare religious freedom in a very serious way. Says the Ramban is learning, and that's what's happening here. This is a tribute, because tribute is an approach that the Jews need to take through all generations, just like dividing ourselves up is a plan for war, and prayer has always been the way of the Jewish people. He actually says later on that by Yaakov spacing the animals, he was spacing the decrees against the Jewish people, which is a very strange concept, because why didn't he put them a little further apart? But somehow he's saying, and if you go through it, you think about it, you see the decrees are one major one in the 12th century, and then another one in the 13th century, and then 14th century, not so much, but only over there, but not here. Then the 15th century, back to the expulsion, and then the 16th century, you don't really have. You have the Inquisition, but that's only in certain places.
Just an Inquisition.
Yeah, but it was only Spain. It was only Spain and Portugal.
No, I followed the people over to
I get it. They tried, but the serious...
They were also defaced in South and Central America, in South America.
But the Jews were relatively, it was not the same. It wasn't like it was in Spain and Portugal. There was a relative safety, and they were further away. That's why many of the Jews came to South America. It was significantly easier. Now, again, you're saying an Inquisition. What's significally easier? But it wasn't like it was in Spain. But certainly, if you went to Israel or into the Turkish lands, things were pretty peaceful at that time. And then, it moves around. Then the pogroms are here, and there's peace here. So the Ramban says that Yaakov spacing the animals was actually spacing the decrees, which is a fascinating concept. But the point is that the Ramban is really reading into this, what we learned a few weeks ago, that the Avos are setting up all the future of the Jewish people. You could read these parshias and know the future of Jewish history and learn at least, it's always hard to say what the future is going to be, but certainly when we're in this situation, we're supposed to look for what would Yaakov do? WWYD. Or Jacob, WWJD.
Yeah, but then that could...
That's
too close.
Too close. Okay. Rabbeinu Bachye quotes the Ramban in another one of his books called Amunah v'Habitachon. In Amunah and Bitachon, I don't know why he says this, but he says that Yaakov was actually threatening Esav. What's the first animal that Yaakov sends? So you look in the verse 15, the first animals he sent,
He sent goats.
Goats. Now where do we see a goat? Where have Yaakov and Esav encountered a goat before?
Goat hair.
Goat hair, and his mother prepared the goats.
Right.
So it's through the goats that he got the blessings. So, says the Ramban, Yaakov is actually sending him goats as if to say, the blessings are mine. And what's the last animal that he sends? At the end of verse 16?
Donkey.
Donkeys. Now what does donkey remind you of? What image does that give?
The Democratic Party.
Perhaps. But what is the image of the donkey?
Well, the king goes on the donkey, right?
Right, but we have a bigger image of a donkey.
Cursing the Jews.
What?
Cursing the people.
Bilam.
Well, that's another place of the donkey, but ultimately it's the Ani Rochev al Chamor. Mashiach is associated with the donkey. It says in the Navi, Mashiach will come in riding on a donkey.
But
So-
before that, was there any allusion to a donkey? That's what.
No, so he's saying, and actually in the blessings of Yaakov, that Yaakov is actually saying to Esav, first of all, they're mine. Here's the goats. And in the end, you will be destroyed anyway by the donkeys. Very interesting pshat, because sounds like he's antagonizing him. Now, does that mean that Esav picked up on this nuance? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I mean, the goats being the first animal he sees should have triggered something in his head. I mean, he's seeing all these goats before he sees anything else.
That's a very common animal to herd in that part of the world. It's not.
Maybe, except when he hears, these are from Yaakov to you.
Not only that, he's got a whole bunch of
And
animals.
then-
Let's send those first.
And he's also got the rams.
But those are, there's some space between them. So he's actually thinking at this point that Yaakov has sent him only 200 goats. So something in his mind, even if especially if that was the intention of Yaakov, then when the next animal shows up, so says the Ramban, that he was sort of sticking it to Esav.
Yeah, but did Esav know he'd actually put on goat skins?
Oh, I'm sure he got the story.
From what Rivka wouldn't tell him.
He probably discussed this with Yitzchak and said, how could you not tell us apart? And we don't know. We don't know the rest. But somehow, certainly the Ramban, who says this pshat, understood that Esav was going to take this lesson. But I'd like to go a little more deeper. Take a look at this verse. And by that I mean verse 15. There's something very, very interesting about verse 15. Something that children are more likely to pick up than adults,
More females.
because we're complicated. We're too sophisticated. Well, take a look at the actual letters. Don't even look at the. So this is a verse with 8 words, and all 8 words end with a final mem. It's a strange coincidence, possibly. Of course, the Mefarshim will never buy into that. There are no strange coincidences. And so says the Baal HaTurim, who we spoke about last week, that these were all Balei Mumin. They were all animals with blemishes, technical blemishes, which disqualifies them from being a sacrifice. And so the memin, which is the plural for mem, being mum, so as if the Torah wants to tell you that he sent these animals all with blemishes, meaning not some of these blemishes doesn't mean he's missing a leg, but they're technically unfit to be a korban, which the Baal HaTurim doesn't say that, but I think what he's saying is that since the animals that Yaakov had been collecting contained within them the souls of the Jewish people, those would be the ones that are fitting to be an offering, the ones that had mumin, the ones that had blemishes, and Yaakov found that in his flock he actually had 600,000. He had 600,000 sheep. And so he would have had 600,220 sheep, of which 220, the 200 ewes that he would send and the 20 rams that he would send, were blemished, they were ruined. And he understood that these weren't his.
That's terrific.
Okay, we're in exile because of Esau sent a moon goat to Beit HaMikdash, and we refuse to sacrifice.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The fact that the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed by the Romans sending an animal, which a Jew then puts a blemish into. But it's not a blemish for the Romans, but it is a blemish for us, and we reject absolutely. Absolutely, that's going to tie in perfectly into this story where Yaakov is taking what seems to be animals that he doesn't understand why they're his. It's almost like he's reading into them that these are to be sent to Esav. Furthermore, says the Baal HaTurim, that the Torah finishes and tells us that there were 8 kings of Esav who ruled before the Jews had a king. Now, we could spend years talking about the 8 kings of Esav, because the greatest secrets in the world, hidden in that process of the 8 kings of Esav, is the process of how God created the world. Go figure. But we're not ready for that yet. I'm just saying that the Baal HaTurim says that the 8 words that end with a final mem being the first word in the first letter in the word melech, refers to Yaakov saying to him, you can take 8 kings before we're ready to start.
It would be funny if these 8 king gematria would match it with these 8 words.
That's a big gematria to go. But can we do a little bit of math here? Not complicated math, but let's try. How many total animals does he send? Okay, 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats. So, 220. 200 ewes.
440.
420.
420.
And then the 20 rams. You cut in the rams already. Yeah, I got it. 440. 30 nursing camels with their colts. That's 30 and 30.
60.
That's 60. Where are we up to? We're up to 500. 40 cows and 10 bulls.
550.
Okay, and then 20 and 10?
580.
580 is the number of animals that he sends. Now, is there a chance that Yaakov was not intending that the parsha begins that he sent messengers to Esav to the land of Seir? Esav is Ish Sa'ir. The word Sa'ir is 370, 10, 200. 580. There isn't a chance in the world that Yaakov sends 580 animals, and he's not intending that the numerical value of Seir, which is who Esav is from when he's born, is exactly 580.
It's basically the piece of what you're saying.
He's giving him the numerical value. And it's almost like we said before in the Baal HaTurim, these animals are born blemished to him because this is the part of Esav that's born into his flock, 580, the exact numerical value of the word Seir, and he's sending him back to Esav. This is your portion.
He also does not want to accept anything that isn't his, that together with the fact they're not his spiritual.
Right? So this leads us, this is the key to a very big secret in the Torah. And to here, I don't know how much time I'll have, but I'd like to read 3 selections from the Zohar. I'm just gonna loosely translate. Some of this is stuff that requires a whole separate discussion. I'm just reading. Yaakov was very afraid and he was in pain, and he increased his prayers and his requests, and he said, "The God of my father Abraham and the God of my father Yitzchak, what shall I do?" And counsel came to him that he should send the goat off the Azazel. We know, Zohar is making a very deep connection here, that on Yom Kippur, we took 2 goats of exactly the same height, the same form, they looked alike. And we would take the 2 goats and place them on either side of the Kohen Gadol. And then there would be a box in front of the Kohen Gadol. And in that box, there would be 2 pieces of paper, one which said on it, La Hashem, for God, and the other one said, La Azazel, to the Azazel. And the Kohen would put the hands in and pull out both cards or lots and place one on one animal and one on the other. And the one that said La Hashem, that would be the Yom Kippur offering to atone for all the Jewish people. and the other one was taken to a faraway mountain and thrown off the mountain.
It's really cruel.
Just thrown off the mountain, and the Gemara, the Mishnah tells us, by the time it reached halfway down the mountain, because the Azazel is a mountain filled with sharp rocks and things, the animal was dead before it hit bottom. Such a strange ceremony. It feels almost unnatural, to the point it feels almost like idol worship. To the point where the Ramban says, in other words, idol worship is what God says is idol worship. So if God says, I want you to do this process, it's not idol worship. But we still have to admit that it isn't the typical sacrificial ceremony.
That seems rather cruel.
That requires a whole separate discussion. Maybe we'll discuss it in Parashas Achrei. But what a strange process where we have to make a lottery between the two goats. We'll get to that in a second. So, actually, let's go straight there. So says the Zohar, come and see. The goat that the Jewish people would send on Yom Kippur to the Azazel is the place where dwells the Samach Mem. This refers to the angel, spelled Samach Mem Aleph Lamed in English, Samael. We do not say his full name because we don't want to invoke his name, not because of respect, but because we don't want to start up with him. Not like we don't say Hashem's name, it's a different process. So we just call him by the first two letters of his name, Samach Mem, or Sam, or Uncle Sam, yes. Leaving out the Aleph Lamed, or God's name from his name, which is really represents the fact that he's not a power on his own, but it's God who gave him the charge to do that. Anyway, but his place, if the place of God is on the Temple Mount, the place of the Samach Mem is on Azazel. And so we take this goat to that mountain and throw the goat off the mountain to give him his portion so that he does not prosecute against the Jewish people. So this can be compared, says the Zohar, to a king who became very angry at his son. And so he calls in the prosecutor, the attorney general, and asks him to judge his son. And of course, the prosecutor is overjoyed at being honored to be the judge, the prosecutor against the king's son. However, when the king's son sees the prosecutor meeting with the king, he knows what it's about. He says, this must be because I angered my father. What does the prince do? He makes peace with his father. But now that the father has made peace with the son, the father cannot simply call off the prosecution. So what he did was, he made a party, and at this party, instead of inviting the prosecutor, he sends a portion from the party to the prosecutor in his home, and then the prosecutor understands that he's being given his portion and he is not invited to join with the king to come and prosecute. These are the words of the Zohar. So too, Hashem says to the Jewish people, bring two goats, one for me and one for the prosecutor, and we'll give him a portion, his portion of the meal, so that he will not show up here and prosecute. And therefore it must be with a gorel, so that it has to be done with a lottery, so that he doesn't think we're just giving him nothing, we're giving him an equal portion. This one could have been that one, and that one could have been this one, and we're giving you the other option. Either one could have been for you. And therefore the other side is appeased, and he does not prosecute. Quote from the Zohar. Quote 2, it's interesting. He doesn't say that here, but this is from the holy books. They say that they would send the person whose job it was to take the goat, was the Torah refers to him as an ish iti. Et literally translates as an appointed person, but the word et is spelled Taf Ayin Yud, which is 480. And we'll see in a second, if you take 480, now, this requires a whole, so just take me on this, my word on this, because this is going to be a complicated thing to explain. But there is a masculine aspect of the negative side, of the evil side, which is this angel Samach Mem, Aleph Lamed, or just Samach Mem. But there's also a feminine aspect, and her name is, we don't say her full name, so we just say Lili, but it's Lili with a taf at the end. And her name is spelled Lamed Yud Taf, which is 3010, 400, which is 480. So her name is 480, and the man who's appointed to take the goat is an Ish Et, which is 480. But more significantly, if her name is the numerical value of 480, and his name is Samach Mem, without the Aleph Lamed, which is from the aspect of God, Samach Mem is another 100, so Samach Mem and Lili together equal 580. Same numerical value as Seir, same numerical value as the same number of animals that Yaakov sends to Esau. Anyway, back to... So therefore, Yaakov takes this from the Zohar. Yaakov takes the offering of 200 goats and 20 he carries on. He says, and with this, you see, when he does this, that instead of Esau prosecuting against Yaakov, he makes peace with Yaakov. And Yaakov rejects this and walks away and says, we're going to try to do this without you. And it's interesting, says the Zohar, we're not going to read this whole Zohar inside. The next place that Yaakov goes after this story is he goes to a place called Sukkos. Yeah, funny. Yeah, Yaakov goes, Vayakov nasa Sukkosa. Read a few verses later. Let me give you the exact verse in case you want to look it up. At the end of page 179, you see Yaakov travels to a place called Sukkos. If it isn't clear, page 179, you see the last line? But Jacob journeyed to Sukkoth. But here, if I can just put this in one more line. This is one more selection in the Zohar. And therefore, after a person has eaten and has derived pleasure and has brought down spiritual influence to all the limbs connected to the forces above, you cannot go away from your meal without giving a little bit to the other side as well, as much as they need in order to survive. So what is that? This is directly from the Zohar. And what is that portion that you shall give to him? It is mayim acharonim, the final waters, because that little bit of dirt which remains on your hand after the meal, by washing it away, you are giving that to the other side, and that's why mayim acharonim is such a serious obligation. For that is the water, the portion that you are giving to the other side. And that's why there's no blessing made on the Mayim Achronim, because it is not from the side of blessing, it is from the side of the prosecution. Says the Zohar that this offering, this tribute that Yaakov is giving to Esau is actually what you do at the end of every meal. So many people don't have the custom of Mayim Achronim because they follow the Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, which says that the reason why we wash Mayim Achronim at the end of a meal is because they used to have this very heavy salt which came from Sodom, and if a person would touch their eyes, they could cause eye damage. They can hurt themselves, and therefore they used to wash at the end of the meal. So therefore, many of the commentaries say that doesn't apply today. We don't have that salt from Sodom, and therefore we don't have to wash Mayim Achronim. But the Zohar says that's a metaphor. It's the salt of Sodom represents the impurity which remains in your hands from the meal, because of the other side, because you've indulged in food and you've now partaken of this world. When you partake of this world, you have to give to the other side. That's the Azazel that we're throwing off the mountain on Yom Kippur. That's the gift that Yaakov is giving to Esau. Yeah, I wish we could have read all three selections a little more inside and go through exactly all the little details which are in the Zohar. But clearly, what we're learning here is, according to the Zohar, it's, again, Rashi learns that it's simply a bribe. And the Ramban learns that it's more of a tribute, like you would give to the kings. But the Zohar is learning that there is a process here, that we have to recognize that there is another side to this world. There are forces within this world that we have to give to them. We have to appease the Satan. We have to appease the other side by giving them a portion, because there are forces working against us. And God has allowed us the knowledge of the secrets for how we can escape those expectations. Meaning like this. Now, I want to explain this because this can get very confusing. We're not saying here that we're worshiping any other force. That's not the case here. But there are forces that God put into the world whose job it is to prosecute against us. And the reason why giving them something stops their prosecution is not because we've somehow bribing them so that they don't go to God, but it's much more like the example of the king, where the king himself has told us that if you want to, you can't call off the prosecutor, but what we can do is make a party and send him his food. If you just disinvite him, that's insulting. But if you send him his food in his place and invite everyone else to come, that, says Hashem to us, is a way to call off the prosecution. So if you don't want him to come to the Beis HaMikdash, send him his goat. And the way that they don't function through slaughtering in the process. They function by taking a goat and shoving it off the mountain and having it shattered to bits. I just want to say, we spend much more time talking about this, but this is why there are many people who are very stringent that mayim achronim, they do not wash out of a fancy utensil. Because by using a silver container for the mayim achronim, you are giving too much. One great Hasidic master said that having silver for mayim achronim is like having a silver toilet bowl. Because spiritually, that's really what you're doing, is you are taking the excess that comes to you and excreting it or giving it away to the other side. I mean, it's actually more literal than we could perceive. That's how they see it. It's like having a silver toilet bowl, which doesn't do any harm, but it's kind of unfitting in the same way. And that's why I've been in shuls where they have 6 foot high silver menorahs and Arna Kodesh that's worth a small fortune. And yet, at the end of a meal, they bring out tin cans where they cut off the Jolly Green Giant and they filled it with water for people to wash mayim achronim with, because that's what I should say. We don't want to take away from all the Judaica stores. There are some opinions who suggest that, on the contrary, it's appropriate that from the Zohar, it seems like we're giving him his portion, that it should be a respectable portion. However, I'm just saying that, and therefore they insist that it should be as nice as everything else. But there are some opinions, because the point that I'm making is that mayim achronim, they perform it in a way where it represents what the purpose of the mayim achronim is, which is to wash away and give a little bit to the other side, because, as we said, these were the portions that came to Yaakov with blemishes that weren't his. Because we always get parts that aren't ours. Just like when we eat food, even the healthiest food, there are parts of it that we're not meant to process, but we're meant to give back. And so this is true of all aspects of the world. Everything which we partake, we have to give to the other side. And so there are many, especially in the areas of the Kabbalistic, where they will see many of the customs which we have, which represent this sort of providing tribute to the other side in order to appease the prosecutor, based off of the portion of the Torah of the goat thrown off the mountain.
The Azazel, the goat that was thrown off the cliff, did not have a moon.
It did not have a...
No, on the contrary. But the mountain is. The water is the same water. It has to be proper water. But the vessel, the utensil which you're using, isn't a shechita knife. It's just shoved off the mountain in a disrespectful way. So they're saying the process by which it's done. But yeah, the water would have to be clean water, etc., and things like that. And that's why the Ma'amar Achronim has to be taken off the table. If it's just water to wash your hands because of some salt from the Dead Sea, then why do you have to take it off the table? You have to take it off the table because this represents the aspect of the prosecution. We remove it from the table so that when we bench and we thank Hashem for our food, we should be completely enveloped in the positive vibes of the food which we ate and our thankfulness to Hashem. So, Yaakov, to sum it all up in one sentence, Yaakov sends these animals to Esav. He's really washing. Ma'amar Achronim.
Wow.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.